Well, good morning. Welcome. My name is Isaac. I'm the lead pastor here. If you are new or this is your first time or your second or third time, we're so glad you're here. If you've been here for longer than I've been alive, we're still glad you've been here. It's good to have you guys all here this morning. I thought I saw we have a brand new appearance today for the first time ever. R and Emily Burke, they're here with little Theodore. I thought I saw them. Sometimes people don't like to be embarrassed like that, but somewhere around here is a little 2-week-old baby. Very exciting stuff. Yeah, we're very excited about Theodore. Okay, so I have just a couple of announcements before I start the message. Men, we've been talking about a men's retreat. It is important that us men get together and we grow together in the Lord and we hear good word and we're encouraged. It's coming up this Saturday. We have to register online today so that there are enough steak available to us. So go on to our website, go on our church app, and register theintersection.info. We'll meet here at 1:30. We'll go to Turning Point at 2. It's 2 to 8:30. There's several sessions, a great time of worship. It's going to be worth going to. It's going to be fun. I think we get to throw axes. I've never thrown an axe. Oh, no, actually, I have. At youth camp, which makes sense. But we get to throw axes and do all kinds of stuff. So register today. Online. If you don't want to register online, you can let me know and we'll figure out another mean, but we need to know today. I say this on a regular basis. If you see me in person, I keep telling you, we have incredible young people at this church. Just incredible. We are proud of our young people here. I have a couple of announcements about that. We have, each school they do these all year long, character traits of honesty, integrity, responsibility, and they give an award to a group of kids for that month. And then at the end of the year, they give an award to the student who exemplifies character of each school. It's a big deal. Every school gets one person. And our church has Ridgeline High School's character trait winner. None of us will be surprised. As soon as we hear this, we go, yep. It is our very own Landon Johnson. We're so very proud of him. We have great people. And we have another announcement. Again, incredible young people here. Mason Fowdy, he's back in the back, and he also attends Ridgeline High School. He participated in the robotics team for their school, and there was big competition. And I hope I get this right. I hope I don't butcher it too bad, Mason, so forgive me if I do. But there's approximately 6,400 robotic teams worldwide that compete. And each team gets to nominate their best sophomore or junior to say, this person's amazing. And then they end up trying to be nominated for what's called the Dean's List because it's named after the founder, Dean Kamen, who came up with this robotics program. And then what happens is that goes to the state and then to the region, and each state gets 10 nominees for the entire state. And then there's the region. And then there's an international award that takes place, and it was actually this weekend. Mason Fowdy was one of the very, very few who was the international winner for this Dean's List Award. Just incredible. Thousands of children participated, and Mason Fowdy, we're very, very proud of you. We have great young people at this church. Those are just two of our incredible kids. There are other young people in this room. We just have great young people, and I'm very proud of them and proud of you guys for continuing to support and encourage. This is just a great place to worship and love Jesus together. Okay, so I admit to being a member of Gen X. Now, most of you probably completely forgot about Gen X. That's normal. We have the baby boomers and then millennials, and Gen X is this forgotten group, like the middle kid that no one talks about, and we just skip over them. I'm at the very last couple of years of Gen X. So I'm not trying to get into a generational war here, but I just want to talk about my generation is very different from some of the other generations. And here's what I mean by that. I noticed that when my childhood is different than today. So when I was a child, we would have games and we would have uniforms for our games, right? So I would only wear my uniform, whether it was soccer or basketball or baseball. I would only wear my game attire, my uniform, on game day. Only then. I would never wear my baseball hat, my game baseball hat to practice. Game day was sacred. I loved games. that was what I looked forward to, was playing in the game. So I had my game gear, my game socks, my game uniform, my game hat. That was one thing. And then to practice, I'd wear other beaten up stuff. But on game day, I had my own stuff that was sacred in a couple reasons, right? There was one, game day was special. It was unique. I wanted to make sure that I had that stuff ready to go. And I also wanted to make sure that I looked as good as possible for the games. I wanted to make sure my uniform was neat, tight, clean, ready to go, stain-free. I wanted my basketball shoes in as good a shape as possible. So I know I'm probably a little unique here. I never wore my basketball shoes on gravel or concrete. Basketball shoes were gym use only. Those were special shoes. After the season, I would wear them all over the place. But I had my game attire. There was a unique situation that was set aside. Now, what I've noticed in today's culture is, I should say, at least in where I grew up, if you wore your baseball uniform to practice, that was the nerdiest thing you possibly could do. That was unacceptable. If you wore your game hat to practice, we wondered what was going on in your house. It just was not acceptable. But in today's culture, kids wear their game attire everywhere. I used to coach my boys in basketball. It was common, it was normal for kids to show up wearing their game uniforms to practice. I could barely handle it. But that's what they do. Or baseball now, you're expected to wear your game hat to practice, to school, to Walmart on Saturday. You wear that thing everywhere. And what I've noticed is there's this blending for me of sacred and common. What was once holy and sacred, game day attire, it is never to be blended. Today, it's just linked together. It's just all one big, it's all the same. Everything has become ordinary. Everything is mixed together, and there's not something set aside, unique for just the games. And that's just common today. So we are in a series called God Is. What we're doing in this sermon series is we're looking at who God is. What is he about? We're looking at his attributes. What makes up this God that we talk about? My desire for us as individuals and as a group of people is for us to know God, to know who he is, the true God. There was a pastor from Chicago in the mid-20th century. His name was A.W. Tozer. He wrote this in a book called The Knowledge of the Holy. This was his starting sentence. The first words of his book were this: What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Let me read that again. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. He says that he went on to say that we have too low a view of God. We don't view God as high enough, as great enough, as powerful enough, as mighty enough. We view him too low. And what happens when we view God too low is then we live believing in a low God. And so how we believe God to exist, we then live out that. And so our views of God aren't high enough. We don't think he's great enough. And so it just affects how we live. And so I want us to know the true God, the good God, because I want to know him as he is, not some version that I'd like him to be. I think a lot of us follow a God that we want him to look like. We make God into our image rather than having God make us into his image. We reverse the process. So we're looking at 6 attributes of God in the sermon series. The ideas come from a guy named James Bryan Smith in his book, The Good and Beautiful God. And he uses the Lord's Prayer as a way to highlight these 6 attributes of God we're talking about. Let me read for you. The Lord's Prayer says this: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us into the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. And last week we talked about our Father in heaven and how God is present. And this week we're looking at hallowed be your name. Hallowed be your name. When was the last time you used the word hallowed in a sentence? You just walk around, oh, this is hallowed. This is just hallowed. We just don't talk like that anymore. So a word that basically means the same thing, that we have a little bit more common use of, it's holy. Holy. Now, holy is, we don't walk around saying holy unless you use it probably inappropriately. and how I wouldn't say it on stage. But we use the word holy. We sing it all the time. What does the word holy mean? Well, for a brief explanation, if you want something just brief, 6 minutes, to give you a little tip here, write this down. Look at Bible Project Holiness. YouTube Bible Project Holiness, brilliant stuff, and they talk about that. But the word holy is from the Hebrew word kadosh, and it means defilement, or free from defilement, free from vice, idolatry. It's pure. So this word holy is set apart, it's sacred. It's not like everything else. It's distinct, right? It's like not using my game day uniforms to go to Walmart in. That's set aside, that's sacred. And when we say that God is holy, what we mean is that God is different than us. He's set apart. He's pure. In God, there is no imperfection. 1 John 1:5, John gives us, I think, an image that to me is really helpful. It says this is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. God has no darkness at all, no evil, no shadows. He can only be good. This is who he is. He's pure and he's different than we are. I know in my life, when I read that, I think, yeah, I have darkness. I have shadows. There's some things I'd kind of try to keep hidden. That's not God. God is just pure light, pure goodness. So this is who he is. Now, holiness takes up a massive space in our scripture. As I was studying this week, I was surprised to read that holiness is talked about more often than God's power, wisdom, and omniscience combined. Just tons of conversation about God's holiness. And in the first 5 books of the Bible, so the first 5 books of the Bible are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. God's love is not mentioned until Deuteronomy 4:37. And yet his holiness is all the way through there. Finally in Deuteronomy 4:37 it says, "And because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them and brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power." That's the first mention of God's love in Deuteronomy, which is the 5th book of the Bible. But God's holiness is just pervasive throughout our scripture, and we don't talk about it much. So there's a place where we really see God's holiness, where we go, okay, well, that's great, it's pure. What does that look like? What does that mean? Well, the first time we really are, I think a great example of this is when Moses, he's out in the wilderness, he's a shepherd for his father-in-law. This is before he goes back to Pharaoh to set the people free. He's out wandering in the wilderness, and he looks up on this hill, and there's a bush, and the bush is on fire, but the bush isn't burning, and he says, that's weird. So he does what, we should all do is, let's go check it out. So he walks up to the bush, and as he gets up there, he hears a voice, and the voice says, Moses, Moses. And Moses replies, here I am, or, yeah, that's me, I'm here. And this is what God says. In Exodus 3:5, it says this. God says, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. See, God is indicating here that there is a distinction, there's a difference between that which is common and ordinary, maybe even in Moses' situation defiled, and that which is holy. Right? So Moses' feet, his shoes need to come off because he's a shepherd. He's been walking in dirt and other things for a while, right? He's coming into this place, and God says, well, your dirty sandals can't come onto this ground because this is pure. This is perfect. This is holy, sacred ground. I'm going to need you to take your shoes off. It's different than what Moses had. Later in Exodus, Moses wants to see God's glory. He says, God, I want to see your face. And glory and holiness, there's some similarities here. And God responds to Moses saying, Moses, what you're asking isn't possible. But this is how the story progresses. Exodus 33:18-20. Moses said to God, please show me your glory. And God said, I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. See, the reason is God's glory, his goodness, his holiness is powerful. It's dangerous to those who are impure, who have defilement, who are imperfect. His goodness is so all-consuming that if we come before God as imperfect beings, we're in trouble. And God is saying, listen, this isn't going to work for you. Hebrews 11:12 tells us that God is a consuming fire. He's so pure, it overwhelms and consumes that which is impure. This is important for us to understand because the Israelites knew then that God was dangerous. You couldn't just approach him haphazardly. His power and his goodness was different than us. And we often think that, God he's just my friend. I can hang out with him. But the Israelites were saying, no, there is something unique and different. And his goodness is so powerful, we have to be very careful with how we engage with his holiness and goodness. Last week we spoke about the need for heaven to come to earth and how God keeps coming back to us and trying to make a place to reunite us. And how he creates these pockets of places where heaven and earth meet, where we can connect with God, where we can unite. And I mentioned the tabernacle and the temple where there would be sacrifices, that people could go in and find in those places opportunity to worship God. And in one of the places of the tabernacle and later the temple, there was a room that was the place to be. It was the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies, what there was is the Ark of the Covenant, where the Ten Commandments were held, and Aaron's staff, and manna. It was placed there. And it was a holy place. You couldn't just walk in there anytime you wanted. There were rules and regulations to get into this place. My family, we recently watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones. Right, you guys? Anybody seen that from the 1980s? In that movie, what happens at the end is they open the Ark of the Covenant. And it doesn't really say if it's evil or power. It just doesn't, seems kind of weird. But whoever looks is consumed. And Indiana Jones says, close your eyes, right? So he doesn't want to look upon it. Well, the Israelites believed something like that. And they kind of made it look kind of evil. But really what they're saying is, in the Israelites, they would believe that to be so full of goodness that it would consume them. It's so good that they are unworthy to be a part of that. So they took it very, very seriously. It was dangerous. It was too pure. I'll give you one more example. One of my kids really likes pineapple. And one day we went to Red Robin to celebrate something or other, and we decided to try pineapple juice. Undrinkable. It's too pure. It's just too concentrated. And that's what's going on here. God is so pure, you just can't take all of him in. It will do us harm because we are imperfect. We are impure. And his goodness is just different than us. So, God's holiness then creates a problem for the Israelites. How are they supposed to worship this God? What are they supposed to do? They needed, in order to worship God, to be pure, which means morally pure. If you look at your life, you go, I gave it a good try. We all recognize that there are problems. So what they did instead was God made a way to make them ritually pure. They needed to be ritually pure, and this comes from the book of Leviticus. So if you want to know what it is to be ritually pure, read the book of Leviticus. Now, most of us, when we start every year, I'm going to read the Bible through the entire year. I'm going to read the whole thing by the end of the year. We start off in Genesis, we do good. Exodus, Leviticus, I'm good. At that part where we become ritually pure, we tune out. There's got to be a gospel or a psalm I can read instead. That whole book is about how we become ritually pure so that we can approach God. And here's what we learned in that process. Impurity leads us to death. So in the book of Leviticus, what's constantly talked about is avoid dead things. Avoid things that are dead because it passes on. The death passes on to us and we can become infected, contaminated, and then we become dead. So it's keeping us away from anything that's defiled or will lead us to death because impure is death, purity is life. Let me give you just a couple examples of this so you know I'm not making it up. This is Leviticus 13:45 through 46. Says this, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose. And he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Another example is some of the eating restrictions. Leviticus 17, 10 through 12. If anyone of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among them eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, no person among you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. And that's in the middle of a chapter full of just eating requirements and what they can eat. And all of that is trying to separate death from life. To be near a person who has leprosy is a big deal because their skin is dead, and then they don't want to be impacted and then have the rest of their body be impacted. And so leprosy, blood, all kinds of situations are there to keep people at a distance from death. So what's important for us to note is uncleanness spreads. That's what happens. If I'm unclean and I touch someone, they become unclean. So there's this contamination process of impurities affect other people and makes them impure. This is why lepers were ostracized. To become ritually clean was a whole process of washing and bathing and doing all these things. It was just a hassle to become ritually clean again, to enter back into community where you can be with your family, you can worship God. It was just an enormous amount of work to try to get ritually clean again. And so they did not want to be unclean. They had to go through this whole process. And then we jump ahead to the story in Isaiah. Isaiah is a young man. He has this vision. And in the vision, he finds himself in God's court, in the temple, before God. Now, he is a person who is unclean before God. He's in the temple. He's not supposed to be here. Let's read what happens in Isaiah 6. It says this. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Isaiah is in the throne room. He is before God. He thinks he's going to die. This is a big deal. He shouldn't be here. He's terrified, and he sees these angels, and they're saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now, I love this. I think this is really interesting. When a word is repeated in the Bible, that's the author's way of saying, hey, I need your attention. Pay attention here. So if you're reading and you see a word repeated several times, pay attention to that. If they repeat the word 2 times in a row, that is, I really want your attention. If they say a word 3 times in a row, that is a sign of, it's not just one thing. It's the epitome of that. I'll give you my favorite example in the Bible. In Genesis 14, there's this story of Abraham and Lot, and there's all kinds of a battle going on. And in Genesis 14, it says this. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. Now, in the Hebrew, instead of it saying full of bitumen pits, it says, now the valley of Siddim was pits, pits, pits. And what the author is saying, there's not just pits in this valley. No. There's not just pits in this valley. He's saying this is the pittiest pit place on earth. There is no place with more pits than this place. So if a word is repeated 3 times, it's Jesus, God isn't just holy. He's not just holy. He's the holiest of holy of holies. There's nothing holier than this guy right here. And that's what's going on in this passage. There's nothing like him. He's the holiest of holy. And the angels and seraphim are singing this. And so God is set apart. And in him there's no darkness. He's holy. Isaiah, he's before this holy God. He's trembling in terror. We get to verse 4, it says, and the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called. And the house was filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So Isaiah sees the holy of holies. And he looks at himself and goes, whoa, I am a mess. I have problems. I am broken. The people I live with are broken. We've got major issues. See, what happens is when we stand before the holy God, who we are is also exposed. God, his goodness, he is so full of light that every darkness just is obvious. And here he realizes that he is in trouble before this holy God. He can't stand before him. Whenever I read this passage, I always think of my college days at a Bible college. In college, if you lived in the dorms, you kind of know that the dorms, you get together and you solve the world's problems. 18, 19, 20-year-old, young people, figure they're the smartest people in the world and they just solve it all. Well, my friends and I don't know why. My friends and I, we would sit around and we would talk about what we would do if we won the lottery at a Bible college. This is how we spent our evenings. I hope my daughter, who is at Whitworth, is spending her time a little better than this. And I would sit there and I think, I wonder what would happen if Jesus just walked in this room right now. Would he be okay with this conversation? I think, oh yeah. If God just walked this, we're fine. We are fine. It smells like men's dorm in there. It's disgusting. It just reeks of 18, 19-year-old boys. It's awful. And I'm thinking, oh, God can just walk in. And here's what I think happens. We have too low of a view of God. We become flippant with God. And then I read this passage and I go, oh, if God walked into the room, if God's presence all of a sudden was in that dorm room, we would all fall on our face. We wouldn't say, Jesus, what do you think? Should we go with a Corvette or a Ferrari? What do you think you should do? We would just fall down going, whoa, I'm a mess. This is what happens when people encounter God. Here's another example of this in the New Testament with Jesus. Luke 5:8. So what happens is Jesus is preaching. He says to Peter, hey, can I use your boat? I want to get on the boat so I can preach a little bit, let the acoustics bounce off the mountains around. Are you okay with that? And Peter's like, listen, I just got done fishing. I'm really trying to clean up. All right, I'm just going to work over here and fix my nets. Peter didn't catch a single thing that night. He's irritated. He's frustrated. He's like, okay, Jesus, that's fine. Use my boat. Jesus finishes preaching, and he says to Peter, hey, let's go out again and go fishing. Now, he'd been out all night. He just cleaned up his nets. How many of you, when you have made dinner, everything is just put away, your teenage son comes in the room and says, hey, what's to eat? Do you say, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. I would like to make you another full meal. I'm frustrated. I just cleaned up. What are you doing? You should have asked me 20 minutes ago, right? Peter's probably saying the same thing. All right, fine. He takes Jesus out in the boat. He catches so many fish, he has to call for other people to help. And then here's what happens. Here's Peter's reaction. Luke 5:8. When Peter saw it, the amount of fish, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinner. I am a sinful man, O Lord. Peter goes, whoa, I don't know who this guy is. He is different than me, and who I am is suddenly very, very exposed. See, when we come into the presence of holiness and we realize that okay, I'm different than you. I have problems. And that's who God is. He is good. When we encounter the holy, there is difference. We're exposed. Our brokenness, our sin, our shame, our regret is there in front of us. It's no longer hidden. It's brought to the surface because of who God is. It's staring right in our face, and it's jarring. It's jarring. We don't like to be confronted with this. It's gross. It's harmful. There's a list of things I'd rather completely forget about. But when when I'm faced with the holiness of God, it comes to light, and I have to deal with it. Okay, so one more part of Isaiah's story. It's this, verse 6. Then when one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. So a seraphim takes some tongs, grabs a coal from the altar, and brings it to Isaiah, and he touches his lips. So here's what's happening. Isaiah is recognizing he's sinful. He's unclean. And the angel brings this coal, and he brings it and he touches Isaiah. Isaiah is impure. How is the system supposed to work? Isaiah's impurities are supposed to spread to those around him. In this situation, God's purity is spreading to Isaiah. It's going the opposite direction. It's bringing Isaiah wholeness, healing. It's purifying his brokenness. So this is revolutionary. This is not how the system works. So then we're going to jump ahead from Isaiah. He's now found healing. He's found holy. He's becoming pure. We're going to jump ahead to Jesus. Jesus enters the scene. He is holy. He is pure. And he does incredible, unbelievable things, like touching lepers. He touched people who were unclean. He's unashamed. He's unworried about their contaminations, their infections. He goes to them. Here's a couple of examples. Luke 5:12. While Jesus was in one of the cities, there was a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I will be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. This is amazing. Revolutionary. People did not touch lepers because it would make them unclean. Jesus, his cleanliness, his cleanness spreads and heals the unclean and impure. It's the same story of Isaiah. The Holy One makes the unholy clean. He brings healing to what is dead and broken. The impurity has no impact on him. I'll give you another example. Matthew 9:20 says this, "And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, 'If only I touch his garment, I will be made well.' Jesus turned and seeing her, he said, 'Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well.' And instantly the woman was made well." So this woman was unclean for 12 years. She's an outcast. She can't be around society. She has the bravery, courage to believe if I can just touch Jesus, I will be made well. She should not do this. She has no business, no right touching a clean person. She has enough faith to go and she touches Jesus and Jesus says, "Whoa, something just happened." He turns and he finds her and he feels his purity flows to her. He brings her healing. And the implication of this is incredible. What was dead is now made alive. Jesus spreads his holiness to people offering life. He makes what is unholy holy. He makes what is unclean clean. He makes what is broken whole. He makes the ordinary sacred. He blends those. This is the good news of Jesus. He is the one who can bring us cleanliness. He brings us holy and purity. He gives us life. We're dead in our trespasses. We talked about it a few minutes ago. But in baptism, we're reminded that he brings us life. Some of us in this room, we look at our life and we go, "Oh man, I'm just riddled with brokenness and shame and regret, pain. I don't know that God would have anything to do with me." And yet what we see in Jesus is he enters in, he touches those who no one else would deal with. Jesus touches, lays his hand on them. He heals them. He jumps right into our mess. He's not afraid of the background and the chaos that's been around us. He jumps right in and brings healing and wholeness. He takes our impurity and he took it to the cross. He was a pure person. And he went to the cross, nailing and becoming our impurity for us. Then because he becomes impure for our sake, he then calls us pure. He gives us his image. He gives us his title of being holy. This is what Peter tells us in 1 Peter 1:15. "But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, 'You shall be holy, for I am holy.'" We are considered holy because Jesus took on our impurities as a holy God. He took it on, and now he did all the work, and now he calls us holy. He calls us clean. We can now approach God. We can now be in relationship. We have no fear. The idea of Jesus walking into this room, and whatever mess it is, we're okay. Because he brings healing and wholeness. We don't have to be terrified. We can say, "Jesus, I need you." And he'll come into the presence. We're okay. He's full of life. He's full of hope and joy. And he gives this to us. Remember how it worked to be in the temple. In order to enter the temple, you had to clean yourself up. You had to go through this whole process to be able to worship and get back into the family, get back into being in a relationship with people. I love this idea because sometimes we think if we're going to come to church, if we're going to have a conversation about God, or I don't know, I shouldn't follow God, let me get a couple of these things done. We think we need to clean ourselves up before we can enter a relationship or before we come to church. That is not this story. It is the complete opposite. It is while we are at our worst, while we are a complete mess, God says, here, let me come and clean you up. I'll take care of it. I'll deal with it. You don't have to clean yourself up. I've already paid for your mess. You are now clean because I say so. I love that he comes, we don't have to worry about it. If you continue to fall and fail, if you continue to live in such a way that you know is wrong, you just keep doing it over and over again, saying, I'm such a mess. I know God will have nothing to do with me. That is not this story. It's the opposite. It's while we are in our mess, God comes to us. And he says, let me take it on for you. You are clean, you are forgiven, you are pure. Not because you did anything, nothing. In fact, it's the opposite. It's because he did it all. And I love this story. It's that his cleanliness, his purity, his holiness comes our direction. And all we have to do is say, thank you, God. Thank you that you will take on this mess. And then we begin to walk. And after we do that, then he starts to chip away. Then he starts to transform us. We have it the opposite direction. We think we have to go all these things and then God will accept us. It's the opposite. Satan's lied to us. And I'm so glad, because if you looked at my life, what a mess. But when I stand and say, Jesus, you took care of it. And I'm just going to try to follow you today and do the very best. He comes in and says, great, that's all I needed. Let's work through this together. So the invitation this week is not to focus on where you have failed. That's not the point here. The invitation is rather to focus on God's holiness, on who he is. And then when we give him opportunity, he comes in and just cleans us up and just wipes it free and says, okay, because of who I am, you are also. And the way we have access to that is just by saying, God, come, I want to follow you. That's all it takes. It's just a willingness to follow Jesus. So your sin and your shame can be wiped away if you choose to follow Jesus. That's your invitation today, is to follow him today. Now, I believe in practices, because it's not just to then not change. God tries to come and he comes and transforms us. So we've got to practice. It says, be holy in your conduct, but it takes time. So the way that we work on being holy, or having wholeness, or being healed, it just takes practice in our life. So what are some ways that keep you from being holy, that keep you whole, from being good in your life? In my life, one of the ways that keeps me from following God the way I want to, from being the kind of person that God's called me to be, is hurrying. Does anybody hurry? I have said many, many times, when I die, what the kids are going to put on my tombstone is, here lies Dad. Line was, hurry up, let's go. And that's, I don't know how many times I've had to say that in my life. Hurry up, let's go. We're late. Come on, hurry up, let's go. That is not the kind of person I want. And that keeps us from being holy. Because holiness is about allowing God access to our life. And if I'm hurrying, I'm not allowing God to come in and clean me, because I got to take charge. I got to rush. I'm not experiencing God's goodness, his light, because I got things to do. Come on, let's go. So this week, let's practice slowing down just a little bit. What can you do to remove some of the hurry in your life? I'm going to make one suggestion. Some of you are going to be really mad. Maybe we can wake up 10 minutes earlier. Just 10. Just to allow God to just speak to us. And so we can sit and have a cup of coffee. And instead of drinking our coffee while we're getting ready and making the kids lunch and getting ready for our workday, instead we can just sit and think, God, I want you to be with me today. Just 10 minutes early. I hope I haven't lost you at that point. Maybe you're not an early morning person and that makes you really angry. Let's try something else. Maybe you can leave 10 minutes early for an appointment. Just drive the speed limit home from church. Go 35 down Sprague. And no matter what the hand gestures are around you, just take your time. Just don't hurry. And just experience God's goodness and his holiness and how he's come and wiped away your sins. And you can just know, I'm not in control. God has me, and I'm going to trust him. And so we're practicing living that holy life by driving the speed limit, which means we're probably going to have to leave 5 or 10 minutes earlier. That's okay. We're going to slow down a little bit. Or some way you can eliminate hurry. Maybe instead of scrolling on your phone until the last minute, you set it down and you get ready. But we want to find ways where we can just practice following the wholeness of God because he gives us these opportunities. He makes us clean. He calls us holy, and we complicate things and are impure in all kinds of ways, but he wipes that out of us, and all we have to do is say, Lord, I want to follow you. And then we choose to follow him and follow his obedience, or follow his steps in obedience every day of the week. We try to do that. And we just practice, and we're going to fail. You're going to speed. And then you're going to say, I was rushing. It's why we call it practice. We try it again. We follow Jesus. Let's pray. Lord, we're so grateful that you are holy. And in your holiness, you aren't scared of our imperfections and impurities and our sin and shame. Rather, you come and you bring healing. You remove the shame and regret from us. You clean us up, Lord. And we can look to you for hope and joy. And God, I know there are people in this room that need to be reminded today that they are not a mistake. They aren't horrible. They aren't a problem, but rather that they are loved and that it's your holiness that transfers to them and your purity that transfers to them. Lord, may we begin to believe that you are good. And because you love us, we are also good in your image. We need you, Jesus. Help us to follow you today. In your name, amen. Normally, we have a couple of discussion questions, but I just have one discussion question this week. And that's so in your small groups, when you're calling your friends and family, I just am curious, what do you think of when you hear the word holy? It's just such an unusual word. So this week, when you're in your small groups, talk about that. What does holy mean? What does it mean to live holy? What does it mean to be confronted with a holy God? And what does that mean for us? What have you learned about that? So talk about that in your small groups this week. As a reminder, there's small groups out in the lobby. Sign up for those. Men's event is Saturday. Financial thing this Wednesday. We have a parenting class. All kinds of incredible stuff happening this week. Before we go, let me just give you a prayer of blessing one more time. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Intersection, you are loved. Go in peace. Have a great week.